Hello, everybody. I'm just going live. I just got to share this link real quick. Let me see here. Okay. Day 2 and 3 combined. Of Bible discussion. Since YouTube removed my day 2 out of 365. Not exactly sure what they found so bothersome in what I discussed yesterday. So, with that being said, I'll briefly touch on it. I was just going over Genesis, and yesterday in particular, the story that I talked about was when Abraham had was asked to sacrifice Isaac to prove his loyalty to God over his own son. And then right before that happened, God told him that he did not have to do that, but that God had seen that Abraham was in fact loyal to God over his own family, which is an interesting, it's a very interesting story. It calls into question, what type of will, what is our will to do what we think God would want us to do or test us with, even if it meant the ultimate sacrifice of our own blood. I'm glad that the story ended well for Isaac, but it still begs the question. Would we individually do that? Like, could we follow through? What would our conviction be like that we would in fact do what God's will is, even in such an extreme case? And right now we live in an interesting time where a lot of people are not sure what they should do, and a lot of our rights are being trampled. My day 2 of 365 yesterday by YouTube was removed, supposedly for violation of something, but they just said it was violated some type of community standard. So I'm not exactly sure if that means that any discussion of religion is going to be viewed as a violation of their standard. So I will look at alternatives to post these videos, maybe on Rumble or some other, I guess, video sources, because I lost that video and I'm a little bummed because I think I went over stuff for 40 minutes and I didn't make a copy of it. So that's on me. I should have made a copy of it. But to make a long story short about that, about day 2 in Genesis with regards to Isaac, right now, when we look at all the events that are taking place, and we are not sure what we should be doing, because there's a lot of people that are feeling helpless right now, and they don't know how it's all going to turn out. There's a lot of fear that has set in, and what I would say is a lot of this is by design. I want to be careful about my words because I don't want to get censored again. But everybody can use their imagination as to the series of events that took place last year, just about a year ago, actually, if you want to get more specific. And those events have been meant to completely undermine, was probably all the political talk, although I may be confusing that one another prayer post. Jessica. Well, with regards to this discussion of the Bible, Jessica, I did make it very clear, and anybody who listens to any of these posts, that I do think that religion is tied to politics. And we've been told by a very corrupt establishment of sorts that that these are off limit conversations, while they simultaneously tell us these things are off limits, and they prevent people from going to church, etc., and other religious institutions. They have no problem espousing propaganda and other misinformation that undermines our spirituality and our religious belief and our constitutional rights to our freedom of religion and our freedom of speech. So, with regards to the political talk, you don't need to listen. And I guess if you want to drop out of the conversation, you'll be missed. But the whole point of the whole point of looking at the Bible in the context of what's going on in the real world is it's a really good way to make sense of what's taking place, because it's a guidepost. There's stories that have lasted the test of time. Bible's thousands of years old. It's the insights from God that you can say they're divinely inspired, or that maybe God wrote them through human beings to tell these stories. And these stories are meant to highlight some of the flaws that we have as human beings. And so, that's just something that we should think about and pray about, so that we can make the connection between all these stories. So, going through Genesis and reading those stories, the beginning of things, right after, I kind of went over that story. I went over Noah and the flood yesterday as well. And then today when I was reading, I was going over the story of Jacob, and how his brothers sold him into slavery. At first, they just wanted to kill him because he was the favorite son. But then they decided to sell him instead. He went to Egypt and then became, the right hand, the right hand of the Pharaoh, and then prepared Egypt for a famine by preparing all the excess crops for, I think, a period of 7 years. And then a famine hit, and Egypt was prepared. And then, sure enough, he came back in contact with his brothers, who assumed that they weren't sure if he was dead or what happened to him, because he was sold into slavery. And things went full circle. They needed to turn to him to save their own necks because of what was taking place. And I think it was, he wanted to test them. There's part of the story where they put a piece of expensive, I think it was a gold cup or something, into one of their brother's bags to see if they would throw that other brother under the bus, and just to save their own necks and their own hides, and they didn't. So he was able to reconcile with them. And it's a really good show if you haven't seen it as well. Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Dreamcoats. It's been a while since I've seen it, probably a couple decades. I think it came out a long time ago. I think I saw the one with Johnny Osmond, and it was an exceptional show, and it's probably available on video to watch. But when you think about, I guess, thinking about these stories in the context of some of the deadly sins that we learn about in Christianity, because the Bible is all Christian faiths use the Bible, but then Christianity has taken the Bible and weaved different type of lessons out of the Bible. At least that's my interpretation. Maybe somebody's going to say, no, that's not what they did. I'm just telling you what I think is the deal. And, a lot of these stories, and not just stories in the Bible, but stories throughout the history of time, other civilizations, if you take the 7 core deadly sins that undermine things, and I think this ties into the story of Joseph, you have basically pride, you have envy, greed, lust, wrath, and There's a couple other ones, but the one that basically did in Joseph's brothers was envy. They were envious of him as being the son that was favored over the rest, and it happens to be because of a couple reasons. Number one is because of how talented Joseph was. So they were envious about his talent, but they were also envious about the way the way their dad viewed him relationship to everybody else. Now, I'm not justifying his father's actions toward everybody else, because there's definitely something to be said about that. And if you were to examine the way his father treated the rest of his children, that was inappropriate as well. And so, what causes that human dynamic to take place? And if you study it and you look at how those dynamics play out in this story and what happened to Joseph and the repercussions of a parent giving favor to one child over another, that there could be very devastating effects by the other children, not just the other children, but other people in the environment. If people feel slighted or they feel as though it's been unjust, then you have a lot of unintended consequences of such actions. And I think that's the real lesson in the story of Joseph is, we kind of focus on, they reconcile at the end, but I think that the takeaway for me, at least in reading that story and watching the show, is, us as parents and being children of parents, right? Because we all have a set of parents. We need to think about what we're doing from the other perspective of other children that we might have if we have more than one child. And then we need to look at our own life with regards to how our parents might have treated us relative to our brothers and sisters. Because if some of the animosity that we might have, for example, I don't have any, but toward my siblings that I'm aware of, but for sometimes other siblings have animosity toward each other. It could be stemming from something that had nothing to do with each other, but it had to do with the way they felt their parents had treated them. And so if you can come to grips with that and you can look at that and you can think about it and have a candid conversation with your siblings, you can come to peace, and perhaps you can build a stronger relationship with those siblings. And I think that's the real big takeaway for me from listening to that story. At the end of the story, it's about reconciliation. They reconciled, and he forgave his brothers for what they had done to him. But they don't really tell you that at the end of the day, his dad was wrong. They don't really tell you that part of the lesson. And that one of the things about having parents, and I guess being a parent, and as we kind of develop, we hope that our children are smarter than us. I mean, that's normal. That's the rational thing to do. You should wish that your children are more successful than you, that they make better decisions than you. And I think that that's an important lesson. So I'm just reading one of the comments here. Joseph shows his brothers mercy. Absolutely. Foreshadowing that Christ shows us how to live. Yep, we're all God's family. I agree. And, I agree with everything that you said, Allegretto clan. But I think that there's another part that isn't talked about that is an underlying theme of that story, at least for me. And so maybe if you reread it, I'd love to see if you see any of the similarities that I'm talking about. But that story is I think it's the last story right before Genesis is over, before we go into the next part of the Bible. And thinking through the creation, and then going through the creation story of the earth being formed, to the earth being destroyed, to this story, it's kind of like you go with the creation of self, then that self lives wickedly, then the earth is destroyed through the flood. And then from that, we have the story of how we relate to family. And then from that story of family with Joseph, the question is, what are we going to talk about with the next part of the Bible? So I think there is an interesting way that these things are threaded, together, and they kind of build like Lego blocks. And I think that if you look at where we are now as a society, there has been a breakdown of the family uh, throughout this country the past 50 plus years. I mean, there's no denying that. If you look at what happened, for example, in the 60s in this country, and once again, if people have a problem with me discussing politics in relationship to religion, this is not what you should be listening to. You can just leave, and I totally understand. But and I've talked about this with some of my friends that happen to be of African descent, so Americans of African descent. I don't like to call them African American, just like I don't like people to call me European American. I'm American first, and maybe I'm of European descent. So, even though Americans of African heritage faced slavery on our soil before it was ended, they had strong family and strong religious beliefs and ties to religion and God. And that faith in God and that faith in justice by God outside of this life held their families together. And they, even after all of that, believe it or not, they were able to remain hopeful, get themselves educated, and stay somewhat prosperous, even with the most dire of circumstances thrown at them. And then what happened is when the civil rights movement came into place, some very corrupt politicians had figured out how to destroy the very bond that kept Americans of African descent strong and weathering the evils of slavery. And that was to attack the family unit. Prior to the so-called Great Society, which should be called the Great Scam by Lyndon Johnson, there was over 80 to 90% of Americans of African descent families were intact. They had a nuclear family in place. And there was no public aid, and there wasn't, none of this crap with all these free benefits. Does it ring a bell? They're trying to do the same thing today to all Americans. So they tested it out on a group that was mistreated in our country's history, and they saw how much damage it caused, because those numbers went from 80 to 90% of Americans of African descent having a nuclear family to, I believe, below 25%. And, up until recently, I remember seeing statistics that not only did the breakdown of the family occur because of these corrupt policies by corrupt politicians that, you can sugarcoat it all you want. They're, as far as I'm concerned, they're purely evil. And this ties into this whole story of Joseph. They not only did they suffer disproportionately with incarceration rates, but they disproportionately suffered from violence toward each other. And there's all these ramifications when you feel slighted and you don't have a full family unit, that you're going to strike back out in your environment against others. And that's one of the reasons why the crime rates among, they call it black on black crime, is higher than any other group. Well, if you look at the statistics with regards to family unit structure, this is the reason why this stuff is all related. And we, as I guess as Christians and people that believe in the Bible, we didn't do a good enough job speaking up against it, because the establishment basically said you cannot use religion and politics are something that should never be discussed. We all have grown up knowing that's one of the common things they like to say. What you shouldn't talk about. What is this here, Bobby? You should watch the General Flynn issue of politics. Okay, I'll definitely check that out. Okay, so I'm not sure what. Yeah, I'll definitely check out that movie. But I think somewhere in the 50s or 60s, churches and religious institutions in America could discuss politics at the pulpit. They can discuss how policy was in violation of the Bible as well as their religious beliefs. And then what happened, and I don't remember what the law is, so if somebody knows it off the top of their head, I could definitely look it up later. The politicians did not like this. They did not want to be held accountable by the religious leaders and the religious among the voters in their communities. So what did they do? They outlawed that type of behavior by saying that we will take away your tax deferred status if you do so. So one of the things that I like about this platform, and obviously I'm going to switch to Rumble and other things, is I don't have a tax deferred status for speaking about politics and religion together. I'm not collecting money from the public about this topic. I'm just one American who's expressing their view, looking at the data, looking at the stories, trying to make connections between how a document that has served our civilization so well for so long, how it ties into what is happening in our institutions right now that's causing us to be at a loss and have a breakdown of trust in the overall system. Sometimes there's a trust that's lacking between other Americans. There's a breakdown of trust between family units. There's a lot of trust that's been violated every which way. And I do not believe that this is by accident. This is by design by some very evil people. Because if you can take our spirit, our mind, and put it into a state of shock for an extended period of time, we are more easily manipulated to do things and to believe things and follow new behaviors that we would never otherwise do. So the only way to offset this insanity is, number one, you need to take the time to reflect, pray, maybe journal and write about what you think is right and just, from not by what anybody else tells you, but you need to look deep inside. I think you're right, Mason. I think it was Johnson that did this. Same with you, John. I think you guys are both right. That I think it was Johnson that did this. And is it a coincidence that LBJ would do that at the same time that this great scam called Great Society would be passed, where the amount of funding of welfare and public housing went up like 5 or 10-fold in 10 years, maybe more? I don't think it's a coincidence. They knew exactly what they were doing. So as far as I'm concerned, if Americans of African heritage that had this scam run on them by Democrats, then the Democrats, as far as I'm concerned, the Democratic Party, if there's anybody that should pay reparations, it should be them. The people that were part of that party that passed these insane laws that prospered at the expense of an entire segment of our population, hold them liable. I'm all for it. I think that the people that perpetrated this fraud and crime, not on behalf of all Americans, we didn't all have anything to do with this, but there's certain people that did. And we should link the people that created these crimes to the penalty of these crimes. And I think that if Americans of African descent, were to make that pitch and that argument, I think they would win over a lot of other Americans to support their claim that the people that prospered from their demise as a group in different parts of the country should be the ones that are hit with the bill. And I would say as much as any politicians that receive pensions that were involved with these crimes, any politicians that prospered economically, I can think of plenty of politicians that have that prospered. They should be treated as executives. If you're an executive and you defrauded your investors or your shareholders, you can have all your money taken from you. And I think the same should hold true for politicians that pushed bogus ideologies, bogus policies that corrupted and hurt other Americans. They should be the ones that end up paying the price. And the American public are us, that if we had nothing to do with it, maybe we just didn't get involved sooner, which is, that's not as egregious as actually being the one that perpetrated these crimes. We should be supportive of that, because if we bring these evil people to justice for what they did for past crimes of this sort, not only are we likely to be a stronger nation with all groups, we're more likely to have less of this as a possibility for other groups in our society. And who's to say we're not on the receiving end of some of these evil people, not just particular groups, but all of us. And so I do think that this was a trial run. They figured it out. They tested it. They didn't just do this in the United States. My understanding is a lot of these corrupt policies happen worldwide. And it shouldn't come as a surprise that there's been a concerted effort globally to undermine religion, in particular Christianity. There's been an attack and a war on Christianity for basically a century. And so we need to take the power back, not just from corrupt people within our government. We need to take the power back from corrupt religious leaders in all of our respective faiths, non-denominational Christians, Roman Catholics, even Jews, that, they have rabbis, we have priests, every religion in America, all different denominations of everything should call into question what is their leadership doing that is suspect and what's corrupt. And they need to bring that leadership to justice and expose it. And, I'm going to say that I've told my son this plenty of times, and I'll say it to everybody here. There's a lot of pedophiles in the Catholic Church, and everybody who's read some of my stuff knows what I think should be done with pedophiles. I don't want to say it because I don't want this video being banned too. So all I'm saying is they deserve the harshest justice possible. And I tell my son, I said, because he asked me questions about, like, what do you think about about Christianity when this is happening? And I said, look, human beings are good and there's evil human beings. And I guess you can say pious and evil. And if someone is evil, that's not necessarily a reflection of the religion. The religion could be it could be very good intrinsically. But if the individuals that are leading the charge with that religion are in charge of spreading the word of that religion are evil, then it can be painted as being evil. And so we have to be very careful about that, because we've been deceived. I know why I might have been banned on that video. I said something about a crime family. I said something yesterday about a very famous crime family who's been involved in politics for a very long time and undermined the United States. And that's what, I'm thinking about it. I'm trying to, as I'm speaking about this right now, I'm kind of smiling because now I think I know why they took that video down. And so this crime family that's been in charge of, this country for a very long time, at least 4 decades, maybe more, they probably have a lot of influence over all the social media in this country as a result of ties to the intelligence apparatus of this country. So you can look into it yourself, but think about which political families were involved with the intelligence agencies the longest in the United States, and you will get your answer. But I do agree with John Taggart that the Pope is, the current one at least, is a very evil individual. And, being a Roman Catholic, I do not acknowledge that Pope as a true representation of the church. I think that he made a deal with the devil, with the Communist Party of China, and I don't trust him. So I think that, I do believe in the key teachings of the Catholic Church, but I also agree with, the different approaches that other denominations of Christianity believe in. And, I have Jewish friends, and I look at some of their teachings, and I agree with some of the teachings of the Torah. In fact, I had a wonderful conversation with someone who wants to help with some stuff with voting from New York. A Jewish woman who left her faith in for a little while, and I'm not sure how long she left the faith, but she's kind of come back and started to pray and reconnect with her religion. And I think it's a wonderful thing. And I've never prayed. I guess I've never said any Jewish prayers that I'm aware of. Maybe there's some overlap between Christian prayers. But I said, I think it would be wonderful to maybe do a prayer session, where she says some of the rosary with me on a chat like this, and then I say some of the Jewish prayers and try to do my best to pronounce those prayers in Hebrew. And I've never done that, but you know what? I think we need all prayers on deck from around the United States. Every religion is represented here. Every people from planet Earth is represented on U.S. soil. And I think that this is a time that we all need to come together and focus on the things that unite us as a people, as an American spirit. And that is freedom, the right to worship our God the way we want to worship our God, the right to speak freely, to not be repressed. It's making sure that tyrannical forces don't silence the minority, and that's what's happening now on a much larger scale. Before it was the minority, just like a sliver of the population. Now they're trying to silence 100 million or more people, and they're not going to stop. And the only way that we will have this stop is when we all come together and defeat what is a common enemy of every American, and not just of every American, but every single human being on the planet. This is a global scourge that is infected our civilization and infected every civilization on the planet. So, I know I got off on a little bit on the topic, but those are the key takeaways, stories from Genesis. The next book that the next part of the Bible that I'll be going over. Hold on a second here. Drawing a blank on what it is. Hold on. Yep, I agree that freedom is not free, and we need to fight for it. And if we don't fight for it, we will not have it very long. And so what we need to do is we're going to, I think I jumped ahead. What's the next? Does anybody know what the next part of off the top of their head? Because I know it kind of bounces around on different types of Bibles, depending on which one you read. But after Genesis, I think we go into, Nicole, do you know which book is next? Exodus, that's right. Genesis and then Exodus. So thank you, Leanne. And so I'll go to the book of Exodus and start going through that. And, we'll just kind of take it from there. Is there anybody else who wants to add anything right now? I'm going to try to figure out how to open this up and see if I can get 2, 3, 4 people into the conversation and make it more of like a roundtable discussion. And what I'll probably do is I'll start seeing if I could look at the historical feeds and see who's chiming in the most. So I see Allegretto is on pretty much every day. I see him. I see John Taggart quite a bit. Nicole Fitness, I see you as well. And I think it would be a little more interesting and this is new for me. I've never really openly discussed what I think about the Bible with everybody, and I think that maybe opening it up and just having an open conversation and experiences and interpretations I think would be great. So I'm not sure what an email please is, Allegretto, but Francis was a reluctant pope. So, okay. Well, thank you everybody for chiming in. You can leave an email, in the description of the video. Well, look, here, I would say I'll just send it here. So if you guys can send me an email at, okay, so people that don't have LinkedIn, just send it, just send it to Bobby Piton at Gmail. And then I just put it in here, but I'm not going to open the email unless I see that in the header, in the description of the subject line, you just say, Bible YouTube, because I just get so many emails already, and I'm doing my best. I'm looking to hire somebody who's going to help with all the people that are reaching out, and I am going through all the people that are helping with the voting project, and I haven't been posting more about asking for more help until I deal with what needs to be done. So thank you everybody for your patience if you're waiting for me to respond, but I will definitely be responding to everybody in some fashion, hopefully within the next few days or next week, and then we can kind of put together a game plan. So thank you all so much. God bless you. God bless your family and your friends, and may God continue to bless America. Have a wonderful evening. Thank you as well, Nicole, for coming. Everybody for showing up today. Have a good night.